Hi folks, welcome to the video. This lecture corresponds with the second set of notes for our unit, and we are talking about our founding documents and the Constitutional Convention. So last video we talked about the principles of government and exactly what values and ideals make up our government. So, right, popular sovereignty, limited government, separation of powers, etc. This video is going to walk through how we made it to our Constitution with all of those principles in place. So all of the debates that led to our Constitution. So make sure that you are on the correct page in your digital notebook, and let's go ahead and get started here. So by the end of this video, you should be able to answer these two questions. These are your objectives. One, describe the process that our country went through to create a working government, and summarize the key debates over the ratification of the Constitution. So those will be the two questions that you will answer at the end of this video as your learning objectives. So we have three major founding documents in our history. The first is the Declaration of Independence, and we're actually going to walk through all of these. The second, after the Declaration, is the Articles of Confederation. These are the two that we are really going to focus on in this video. And then, of course, our third one is the U.S. Constitution. We are going to have a separate video entirely on the U.S. Constitution and its structure and setup. So we're focusing on these two big ones today. Okay. Now, let's start with the Declaration of Independence. If any of you have seen Hamilton, this is probably my favorite part of the entire play. But let's start with the Declaration. And this was written in 1776. And what this did is it established American independence from Great Britain, right? It's declaring independence or freedom from Great Britain. And it's also going to set those broad principles, our beliefs for American government and what it will eventually become. So, for example, in the Declaration of Independence, we see that people have natural rights, right? You would have seen life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That is a very, very important belief that our founders had. You will also see that government only exists with the people's permission. In the Declaration of Independence, it straight up says consent of the governed. So already in 1776, we're seeing this idea of popular sovereignty. The idea that people can abolish or change the government when it fails to protect the people's natural rights. This is that idea of the social contract. And this was very important to our founders, right? Under the king, we did not have authority. We did not give the government power. Supposedly religion did, right? This divine right. And we really wanted to make sure that if the government failed to protect the rights that everyone has, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, then we have the power to establish a new government. That is that idea of the social contract. So after the Declaration of Independence, great. We declare independence, we fight this war, we win barely, but we did it. What is the next step? Right? Now what? How do we avoid this concept of anarchy, this lack of government, this chaos? How do we avoid that? And our answer was the Articles of Confederation. And this is our very first governing document. And as you can see, it's very short-lived. It only lasts 10 years. So this was a very strong reaction to the British monarchy. We really wanted to limit the power of the national government. So think about it like this, right? Some of you may have experienced this yourselves or know a friend that has done this. Let's say your friend or you have been in a relationship with somebody and it does not work out for whatever reason. And then the next person that they go out with is the complete opposite of that person, right? They wanted to go so far away from the type of person that they used to be with or you used to be with. That is exactly what we did. We were very much wanting to avoid a very strong national government. So we kind of went in the complete opposite direction. And what we did was we established a weak national government, right? We were afraid of the government abusing its power. So we said, all right, fine, we'll just get rid of a very strong national government. And we will give all of the power to the states. That sounds like a solution to our problem. However, and I love this little GIF here, it didn't go very well. There are a lot of weaknesses that come with the Articles of Confederation. This idea of giving all the power to the states, right, didn't work out so well. So the first weakness of the Articles of Confederation was that we did not give the national government power to tax the states or the people. And if you don't know, taxes are basically what is used to run the government. Your tax dollars and your guardian's tax dollars are what pay for the things that the government does, those services that we talked about in the last video, the armed forces, for example. So all that the national government could do was ask the states for money. And imagine that, right? Because the states could say no. So the government really couldn't do much because it didn't have the money to. The national government could not raise or maintain an army. We see these as direct results of how we were treated under the crown, the British king. We were being taxed unfairly. Fine, don't let the national government tax. We were being fought by our own government. Fine, the national government can't raise or maintain an army. That solves the problem. But what happens when you have a conflict, especially between the states? That is going to be a very big issue that we will see here in just a second. Another weakness is that the national government couldn't regulate interstate commerce. Commerce is a fancy word for trade. Interstate, meaning between states. So the national government could not regulate trade between states, and it couldn't settle disputes between states. So it really was just kind of saying, no, guys, stop. And it had no muscle. It had no army to be able to stop these issues. It had no final say to be able to really put states in their places. There was no executive or judicial branch under the Articles of Confederation. We had one branch of government, the Congress, and it really wasn't given, as you can see, many powers. So we had no executive. We had no person or group to enforce laws. That was an issue. We had no judicial branch. We had no courts to decide the fairness of laws. So what we end up seeing is that the states are really just kind of running the show. They're doing their own thing. They each have their own trading policies, their own ways of taxing, and things are pretty chaotic without this executive and judicial branch. And then our final weakness is that it really was just too difficult to pass laws and amendments to the Articles of Confederation. It required unanimous, all 13 states to amend the Constitution, and 9 out of 13 to pass any laws. And these states have had time to become very different over the years of our country, and it's very hard to get them all to agree, right? I have a hard enough time when I'm with a group of friends deciding where we are going to get dinner, right? And I'm sure you guys do too, let alone getting 13 people or groups to agree on a law or amendment or change to a document of the government, right? That was a very, very hard task. So we see all of these weaknesses culminate in an event called Shays Rebellion. And to give you some context here, Shays Rebellion resulted really from the economic problems of the Revolutionary War. Money had lost its value. States, as we said, were the ones responsible for taxing. They had their own currencies, so each state had their own money, right? So things were just not consistent and very chaotic. And what happens is farmers rebel in Massachusetts. And a lot of these farmers were veterans of the Revolutionary War. They had lost their farms due to foreclosures. They couldn't pay taxes. They weren't getting paid. And the national government couldn't do anything about it. The national government could not establish an army. They had no power to end the rebellion. And this was really actually kind of embarrassing for the national government. And this made a lot of people step back and think. And really, what this event did was it highlighted the weaknesses that we went through on the last slide of the Articles of Confederation. And what we knew now was, well, we need a stronger national government because there are going to be issues between states. There are going to be rebellions. We need a strong national government to be able to make sure that we have unity among the 13 states and peace, and we're actually, a functioning government. So what we see then is a convention called, and the 13 states send representatives or delegates to this convention, but it's not so easy. Of course, all of these states have different interests, and there are a lot of debates. So make sure that you are on the next slide of your digital notebook, and we are going to go through the quick compromises, or we're going to quickly go through the compromises that happened at the Constitutional Convention that led to our Constitution. So the very first question on everyone's minds is, all right, Articles of Confederation, states with all the powers, really didn't work out so well. So how should the government be set up? And how should states be represented? Okay, so make sure that you're filling in the table that you see on your notes. And really, there were two plans put into place to answer these questions. The New Jersey plan set up a unicameral legislative branch, or it proposed a unicameral legislative branch. That is one branch of Congress. And the New Jersey plan wanted representation equal per state. No matter the population, no matter the size of the state, all states would be represented equally in that legislative branch. Now, small states are going to say, yes, we love this, because they don't have a whole lot of people in their state. So they know that by this plan, they will have equal power to the larger states. So this is the plan favored by smaller states with smaller populations. On the flip side, the Virginia plan was proposed, and this proposed not a one house branch of Congress, but a bicameral legislative branch. Bi means two, so this proposed a two-house legislature. And the big piece of the Virginia plan was that the big states said, all right, no, we don't want representation equal per state. We want representation based on population. So the more people you have in your state, the more representatives you need or you should have. And of course, this is going to be favored by our big states because they have more people, they want more power, they feel as though they should be represented. And this representation really had been an issue since the beginning of seeking independence. Right? Taxation without representation. So this was a very, very big debate. And you see your smaller states wanting equality, they wanted equal footing, and our big states believing that they deserve a stronger voice in making laws and making decisions. So what we see proposed is these two plans, and then we have a compromise. And the compromise is known as the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise. And ultimately, what this created was a bicameral legislature. So we do have our two-house Congress. So Congress is made of the Senate and the House of Representatives. And the Senate took part of the New Jersey plan. And in the Senate, each state has equal representation. There are 2 senators per state. Okay, so just like the New Jersey plan proposed, this satisfied the smaller populated states because everyone was equal. And then we have the House of Representatives, and this took pieces of the Virginia plan because in the House of Representatives, representation is based on population. So the more populous states, the states with more people, do have more representatives, right? California has like 45. I'd have to check, but Ohio, our population is very different. We have like 18, 16 to 18, depending on the year typically. Okay, so this is our very first compromise that happens at the convention. Another question popped up about representation, and that was, what about slaves? So you can see in this picture here that the slave population was very different in the North versus the South. So the larger the square, the more slaves there were. And this is going to cause some tension, again, between northern and southern states. So ultimately, the southern states wanted to count slaves toward representation, because by counting slaves, votes in those slave states would have more sway than voters in non-slave states, because there would be more people, so they'd have more representation. The North, however, said, wait a minute, we are already smaller. We're already giving up representation in the House. We should not count slaves toward representation. Okay? So what we see is the 3/5 compromise. That is the name of this compromise that answers this question. What about slaves? So ultimately, right, we know that the House of Representatives is based on population. The North did not want to count slaves toward the population. The South did. And what we see is, all right, how about this? As a compromise, 3 out of every 5 slaves will count toward population. Okay? Please do not confuse counting slaves toward representation and population as slaves actually voting. The slaves did not have the right to vote in either the North or the South. So that is not what we're talking about here. We're simply talking about, should they count toward the number of people living in the state? So just to give you an idea, okay, of the importance of this, the first House of Representatives had 105 members. Southern states, when you counted slaves toward the population, had 47 of those 105 seats. So just about half, a little under half. If we did not count slaves, even 3/5 of them, toward the population, they would have only had 33. So that is how much or how many slaves there were in the South. So really, we're seeing that this compromise is going to satisfy both the North and the South in terms of counting slaves toward representation. This will be fixed by the 14th Amendment, because I'm sure some of you are sitting there and you're like, we're only counting 3 out of every 5 people. I thought everyone should have the right to vote. They do. This is fixed by the 14th Amendment, which gives everybody equal citizenship and equal representation. Our next question that was answered during the convention that led to a compromise was, should the states or the federal government control and regulate slavery? So another slavery question. But should it be the states or the federal government? Because under the Articles of Confederation, the states had all the power. They're not really wanting to give a lot of this up. And what we see is the Commerce and Slave Trade Compromise. And what this says is, all right, states, interstate commerce and trade is going to be regulated by the federal government. Okay, but Congress, the federal government, cannot prohibit or stop the international slave trade for 20 years after we ratify this document. So yes, we're giving the federal government more power when it comes to trade, but they cannot touch slavery, the biggest part of the economy of the South, for 20 years. Okay. And then our final compromise and question that is answered at the convention is, how can we make sure that the Constitution can be updated as necessary? Because under the Articles of Confederation, as we saw with those weaknesses, that was not easy, and it hardly ever happened. So how can we make sure that this document can stay updated and relevant? And we know that this document isn't going to be perfect. So it's going to need to be changed over time. So we need a way to update it when necessary. And the answer was the amendment process that is outlined in Article 5 of the Constitution. And there are two ways to do this. And we'll talk about this even more in later units. But basically, 2/3 in both houses of Congress can propose an amendment. So 2/3 of the Senate, 2/3 of the House of Representatives can put forward an idea to amend. Then 3/4 of state legislatures have to ratify or approve that proposed amendment. So you have the national government being the one to propose, but the states are checking that power by being the ones to approve it or ratify it. That is the most common way. And the second way here, the second method has only ever been used once. And it's kind of similar, the proportions are the same. So 2/3 of states can request a national convention to propose an amendment. Then 3/4 of state conventions are needed to ratify or approve. This is the least common method. It does not happen very often. It's only happened once in our history. But the big thing to know, guys, is no matter the method that is being used, it is always 2/3 to propose, 3/4 to ratify. 2/3, 3/4. You'll hear me say that a million times in class, okay? This, like I said, is going to fix a huge problem under the Articles of Confederation, which were just too hard to ratify, too hard to change. Nothing ever got done. So that wraps up kind of the brief history of our governing documents and the compromises that formed our Constitution. So make sure that you have everything filled in on your notes. If you have any questions, make sure to jot those down and bring them to me in class. And next, you're going to answer those learning objectives. So remember, those were to describe the process that our country went through to create a working government. So what were the steps? And then summarize the key debates over the ratification of the Constitution. So you will answer those objective questions now. Have any questions, let me know in class or send me an email, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon. See you later.